In the quiet hours before dawn, imagine a landscape where a thin mist drifts lazily over a shallow river in northern Italy, the kind of river you might skip stones across if you weren't a Roman general deciding the fate of a republic. The air is cool, the world is still, yet something unusually important is about to happen, the kind of important that makes historians lean forward in their chairs centuries later. Julius Caesar, wrapped in a cloak that probably needed brushing, guides his army toward the Rubicon, a river so modest that even geese would hesitate to migrate for it. Yet on this night, it becomes a boundary that no Roman commander is meant to cross with troops. Caesar pauses, perhaps thinking about logistics, perhaps about breakfast, or perhaps about the legal implications that would definitely earn him a sternly worded letter from the Senate. Still, he steps forward, and so begins a chain of events that will quietly rearrange the future of Rome. Rome was not always a place where generals marched dramatically across rivers. Many centuries earlier, it had been little more than a cluster of huts on 7 hills beside the Tiber. These early communities gradually fused into a settlement that would one day become the city Rome, though at the time most residents were probably more concerned with herding animals and discussing whose turn it was to maintain the communal ditch. As the settlement grew, a series of kings took turns ruling, though the exact details remain blurry due to how long ago it was and how rarely anyone wrote anything down unless it involved property disputes. Each king added something to the early city, from basic civic organization to calendars that people immediately ignored until someone reminded them to use it. Eventually, however, the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, proved unpopular due to his behavior that consistently suggested he had skipped the chapter in How to Rule Politely. The resulting public frustration led to his removal and the establishment of a new political system. Thus, the Roman Republic emerged, designed with checks, balances, and a healthy dose of complication. Power was distributed among elected consuls, a senate full of experienced aristocrats, and various assemblies. It was a system that encouraged debate, legal procedure, and occasional arguments that lasted longer than lunch. The Romans produced the 12 Tables, a set of laws written on bronze tablets and displayed publicly so that everyone could see the rules, or at least walk past them, pretending to understand. This legal foundation became central to Roman identity and would influence generations far into the future. During its early years as a republic, Rome was not yet a major power. In fact, the city suffered a dramatic setback in 390 BCE when a group of Celts arrived, caused extensive damage, and likely left without cleaning up after themselves. This event left Rome shaken, but also oddly motivated. In the following decades, Rome worked steadily to strengthen its defenses, reorganize military practices, and expand throughout central Italy. Through campaigns against neighboring peoples such as the Samnites and Latin communities, Rome slowly increased its territory and confidence. And even though it was not yet the mighty force it would become, the foundations for future expansion were being quietly laid brick by brick, shield by shield, and occasionally by someone tripping over their own spear. By the late 4th century BCE, Rome's citizen army had gained a reputation for discipline and resilience. Citizens served when called, forming legions that were more determined than glamorous, the kind of troops who marched great distances while discussing the best sandals for long campaigns. With time, Rome controlled much of central Italy and had begun looking further south, where prosperous Greek colonies thrived. These new interactions and conflicts would play a central role in shaping Rome's path, setting the stage for larger confrontations and an ever-expanding sense of ambition. All of this lay in the background as Caesar stepped across that small river many generations later, continuing a story that had begun long before anyone imagined a world-spanning empire emerging from a cluster of hillside villages. Myth and the actual origins of Rome. Long before Julius Caesar paced at the edge of the Rubicon debating whether to ruin the Senate's day, the story of Rome had already been circulating in a blend of memory, imagination, and the occasional storytelling exaggeration. People in the ancient world seemed to enjoy a dramatic origin tale as much as anyone trying to spice up a dinner conversation, so over time, a rather enthusiastic legend emerged about how Rome began. It featured abandoned infants, dramatic rescues, wild animals with unexpectedly advanced childcare skills, and a rivalry between brothers that definitely needed conflict resolution therapy. According to this well-known tale, Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, twins left beside the Tiber, who were supposedly raised by a creature that, if it ever actually existed in that role, would have deserved a parenting award. When the twins grew up, they gathered followers, examined the hills around them, and tried to agree on where a city should go. This discussion escalated rapidly, and Romulus eventually became the sole founder after Remus exited the story in an abrupt and unfortunate manner. The new settlement took the name Rome and began its long journey toward becoming the city many would later admire, fear, or meticulously attempt to conquer. For generations, these stories helped give Rome a sense of grandeur, though anyone observing from the outside might have wondered why the origin of a major urban center involved so many dramatic plot twists. Still, legends served their purpose, especially when written centuries later by poets who enjoyed embellishment almost as much as they enjoyed long descriptive passages. These stories circulated widely, adding an air of destiny to the city's beginnings, even as they drifted far from anything historians could verify. But beneath the myth, Rome's origins were simpler, quieter, and considerably less theatrical. Archaeological evidence paints a picture of people slowly settling the hills beside the Tiber during the late Bronze Age, building huts, tending fields, and occasionally arguing about something mundane like goat ownership. By around 1000 BCE, several small villages existed near one another, each perched on its own hill, each developing at its own pace. Life would have been modest, consisting of daily tasks and local customs rather than heroic battles or supernatural interventions. Over time, these separate communities gradually blended, merging into a larger settlement as trade increased and cooperation became more practical than shouting across hillsides. This organic growth formed what would eventually become the city of Rome. There was no single founding moment with dramatic musical accompaniment, just steady human activity accumulating over generations. The people living there likely never realized they were contributing to the creation of a future superpower. They were simply trying to get through the week without running out of grain or patience. Later Roman historians, writing long after these early inhabitants had disappeared, attempted to construct chronological lists of Rome's first rulers. According to them, the city was governed by 7 kings, beginning with Romulus. These kings supposedly reigned for remarkably long periods, which suggests either exceptional longevity or exceptionally optimistic record-keeping. Romulus was followed by rulers with names that rolled off the tongue in a way that modern students find both impressive and mildly intimidating. Each king was credited with certain achievements, from civic organization to foundational customs, though verifying any of these contributions is nearly impossible since early records were sparse and sometimes destroyed during later conflicts. Nevertheless, this list of kings became a key element of Roman identity. People liked the idea of a dignified early monarchy, even if that monarchy occasionally displayed leadership styles that would not have passed basic human resources training. The final king, Tarquinius Superbus, was remembered for ruling in a manner that convinced nearly everyone that they had had enough of kings altogether. Stories about his conduct spread widely, though it is unclear how many details were precisely accurate and how many were added later by citizens who enjoyed telling stories about unpleasant former leaders. What mattered was that the population eventually removed him, eliminating the monarchy and transitioning into a new form of government that would last for centuries. The early Roman villages, by that point more integrated than ever, were ready for a system that did not rely on a single individual who might wake up one morning and make a questionable decision affecting everyone. Without royal rule, authority shifted toward elected magistrates and councils, marking the earliest phase of the Roman Republic. Although these changes would eventually create an intricate political structure, at the beginning they were straightforward responses to practical needs. The new system grew slowly, shaped by the city's population, geography, and increasingly complicated social networks. The Rome of this early period looked nothing like the marble-clad metropolis that tourists admire today. It was a modest place with simple buildings, constructed from wood, mud, and whatever materials were conveniently available. The streets were not yet bustling avenues. They were winding paths, shaped partly by foot traffic and partly by livestock, with very little regard for urban planning. Life centered around communal work, seasonal activities, and the basic tasks of maintaining household survival. Yet even in this simplicity, the foundation of Rome's future expansion was quietly forming. Its location offered access to trade routes, fertile land, and a river that, despite one day becoming famous for a certain unauthorized crossing, served primarily as a practical resource for early daily life. Though mythmakers adored the dramatic version of Rome's founding, the true story reveals a gradual human process. People settled, villages grew, communities merged, leaders emerged and changed. Each generation added something new, not through dazzling heroics, but through ordinary decisions, adaptations, and the occasional minor disagreement about boundaries. Over time, these cumulative developments shaped a city increasingly capable of organization, defense, and influence. This unassuming beginning created the groundwork from which the Republic would rise, eventually producing armies renowned for discipline, laws etched on bronze for public display, and political debates that could stretch long enough for participants to forget whether it was still the same meeting. Centuries later, when Caesar reached the Rubicon, the world he shaped was already the product of countless, quieter eras and countless unnamed individuals whose daily actions built the Rome he inherited. From scattered huts to a unified settlement, from an unclear list of early kings to the steady formation of a republic, Rome's early development unfolded without spectacle but with persistent momentum. Each step, though ordinary at the time, contributed to the city's growing identity, preparing it for the long sequence of events that would eventually transform it into a dominant Mediterranean power and set the stage for stories far more dramatic than its origins ever were. The overthrow of the monarchy and the formation of the Roman Republic. As the early Roman settlement expanded from loosely connected villages into a town that felt increasingly important, its political landscape also grew more complex. For generations, Rome had lived under a series of kings whose rule, although presented neatly in later historical accounts, was likely far less organized than the lists suggest. Each ruler supposedly contributed something meaningful to the city, whether it was administrative structure, urban development, or simply the encouragement of people to agree on what day it actually was, according to the evolving calendar. Life under these kings was not always turbulent, but it was not particularly stable either, and by the 6th century BCE, the population had become accustomed to both the advantages and inconveniences that accompanied centralized authority. The final ruler in this line, Tarquinius Superbus, governed in such a way that the population periodically double-checked whether the word superbus was meant to be ironic. His leadership style was remembered as forceful and dismissive, with decisions that included limiting the influence of advisory bodies and exercising authority in ways that made many citizens prefer nearly any alternative system. The precise details given in later sources may have been embellished, but the general impression that he inspired widespread dissatisfaction seems consistent. Eventually, an incident involving his family created enough unrest that people decided rather firmly that monarchs had enjoyed a long enough career in Rome. The transition that followed was not instantaneous, but the idea of eliminating kingship took hold with surprising speed, suggesting that the population had been accumulating frustrations for some time. Without a monarch, Rome needed a new method of governance, one that offered leadership, but avoided concentrating too much power in a single individual who could, at any moment, announce a questionable project or make a sweeping decision that inconvenienced half the city. The solution was to divide authority among officials who would serve for limited terms and be accountable to the broader community. Thus emerged the framework of what would become the Roman Republic, a system that would endure through centuries of conflict, expansion, and political experimentation. At the heart of this new arrangement were the consuls, two individuals elected annually to oversee military and civic duties. The presence of two leaders at once was not merely symbolic. It ensured that each consul had a colleague capable of interrupting particularly impulsive decisions. This structure encouraged balance, cooperation, and, when necessary, long conversations about strategy that may or may not have included subtle attempts to avoid extra work. These consuls were supported by other magistrates who handled administrative, legal, and financial responsibilities, creating an intricate web of shared duties. Alongside the consuls stood the Senate, an advisory council composed of experienced figures from prominent families. The Senate did not initially wield absolute power, but its influence grew steadily as its members provided continuity and long-term strategic thinking. Meetings were likely lively affairs, filled with debate, raised eyebrows, and the occasional pointed reminder about precedent. Over time, the Senate became one of the central institutions of the Republic, known for its persistence, its detailed discussions, and its remarkable ability to maintain relevance even when impatient generals would have preferred to make decisions more quickly. At the same time, assemblies formed from the body of Roman citizens held the power to elect magistrates and pass certain laws. Participation varied depending on wealth and status, forming a system that reflected both the democratic and aristocratic tendencies of the society. Although voting procedures could be lengthy, they gave citizens a sense of involvement in public affairs, even if the process sometimes required them to stand in long lines under the sun while wondering why certain issues could not be resolved with fewer speeches. In an effort to solidify their new political structure, the Romans created the 12 Tables, a set of laws engraved on bronze and displayed publicly. These laws aimed to clarify procedures, rights, and rules, ensuring that citizens understood the principles governing their society. While the content ranged from property concerns to guidelines for resolving disputes, the very existence of written laws represented a significant step forward. Anyone wandering through the forum could pause, pretend to read them attentively, and later reference them confidently in conversations, even if they only remembered a sentence or two. As the Republic settled into its new form, its population adjusted to the rhythm of elections, debates, and civic responsibilities. Even though the system was more complex than the monarchy it replaced, it allowed for greater oversight and participation. Citizens learned to navigate this structure, from young men aspiring to public office to elders who had opinions about every new magistrate. The early republic may not have been efficient by modern standards, but it provided a sense of order and predictability that contrasted sharply with the unpredictability of royal rule. Over time, the Republic expanded its reach, forging alliances and managing disputes with neighboring communities. Without a king directing affairs from above, these interactions required collective decision-making supported by military leadership. The consuls frequently commanded armies, while the Senate deliberated on strategy and diplomacy. Although such collaboration could occasionally resemble an extended family attempting to plan a holiday meal, it generally produced decisions that strengthened Rome's position in central Italy. Even within the city, the Republic's institutions developed additional layers of complexity as new offices emerged to address specialized needs. Quaestors handled finances, aediles managed public buildings and festivals, and praetors took responsibility for judicial matters. Each role came with expectations, duties, and the possibility of gaining enough recognition to seek higher office in the future. Ambitious citizens began to chart political careers, following an informal sequence of positions that created a sense of progression similar to climbing a ladder, though with considerably more paperwork. This era also saw the early formation of social dynamics that would become characteristic of Roman public life. Leading families competed for influence, cultivated alliances, gave generously to public projects, and occasionally tried to outdo one another with displays of competence or generosity that unintentionally turned into friendly rivalries. Public speaking became a valued skill, and anyone hoping to achieve political success learned to deliver speeches that were persuasive, orderly, and ideally short enough that listeners did not drift into daydreams halfway through. Despite the ongoing adjustments required to keep the system functioning, the new republic proved remarkably durable. It withstood internal disagreements, evolving customs, and the administrative challenges that accompanied a growing population. Through these early developments, Rome stabilized itself and began to transform from a modest town into an organized state capable of shaping the region around it. The absence of monarchy did not lead to disorder. Instead, it encouraged broader participation and a sense of shared responsibility. The Republic's design, with its carefully balanced powers and constant negotiation, created an environment where decisions emerged from discussion rather than command. Though imperfect, it offered a political model that could absorb shocks and adapt to changing circumstances. As decades passed and Rome continued to strengthen its military and diplomatic capabilities, this structure allowed the city to project influence far beyond its original boundaries. Thus, Rome entered a new phase of history. Freed from kings, guided by elected officials, and anchored by written laws, it set forth on a path that would lead to expansion, alliances, conflicts, and the gradual rise of a system far more powerful than anyone in the early Huts could have imagined. What began as a simple effort to replace an unpopular ruler became the foundation for a republic that would dominate the Mediterranean world and influence political thought long after its own institutions faded. Rome in its early struggles and the gradual expansion across Italy. In the centuries following the establishment of the Republic, Rome remained far from the confident powerhouse it would eventually become. It existed as a modest city-state surrounded by neighbors who were often stronger, richer, or simply better at showing up to battles with impressive equipment. Rome's position in central Italy placed it among communities that had been developing for centuries, such as the Etruscans to the north and the Greek colonies to the south, each with their own forms of government, artistic accomplishments, and regional ambitions. Rome, meanwhile, was still adjusting to its new republican system, learning how to elect officials without tripping over procedure and figuring out how to manage growing administrative responsibilities while maintaining a city that seemed determined to expand whether or not anyone was fully prepared for it. During these early years, Rome encountered significant challenges, one of the most memorable being the invasion by a group of Celts around 390 BCE. These visitors arrived with little interest in following local customs and proceeded to cause extensive disruption. The city's defenses were not yet capable of repelling such a force, and Rome suffered considerable damage as a result. Although later stories about the event were shaped by memory and imagination, the basic fact remained that Rome emerged from the incident with a strong sense of vulnerability and an equally strong desire not to repeat the experience. This moment, though difficult, became a turning point that encouraged the city to reorganize its military structure, fortify its surroundings, and develop strategies to prevent future surprises from guests who had not been invited. Following the Celtic attack, Rome began investing significantly in its military capabilities. Citizens continued to serve as soldiers when called, forming legions that grew steadily more disciplined and organized. Training improved, equipment standards rose, and military obligations became a part of civic identity. Marching formations, tactical maneuvers, and group coordination gradually transformed the Roman army into a force capable of holding its ground even against formidable opponents. Though conditions in the field were rarely comfortable, soldiers learned to manage long journeys, sudden weather changes, and the occasional debate about whether their rations had been packed properly. As Rome strengthened internally, conflicts with neighboring Latin communities and Italic tribes became more frequent. Some of these confrontations emerged from existing rivalries or territorial disputes, while others resulted from shifting alliances and political developments across the region. The Samnites, a powerful group inhabiting the central Apennines, proved to be particularly persistent opponents. Their territory was rugged, their fighters resilient, and their strategies often challenging for Rome's developing legions. The conflicts between Rome and the Samnites unfolded over several decades, testing Rome's endurance and shaping the evolution of Roman military tactics. The Samnite Wars marked a significant stage in Rome's rise. Although the results of individual battles varied, Rome gradually learned to adapt, reorganize, and improve. The process often required adjusting troop formations, revising strategies, and ensuring that roads were built to allow forces to move quickly across hilly terrain. These roads later became iconic elements of Roman infrastructure, though at the time they were simply practical tools for preventing soldiers from wandering in circles while trying to locate the front lines. Rome's persistence eventually enabled it to secure dominance over the Latin communities and expand its influence throughout central Italy. In doing so, Rome began to form a network of alliances, treaties, and obligations that created a layered political structure across the peninsula. Some communities became full citizens, others partial citizens, and still others allies obligated to provide troops without receiving the full benefits of Roman citizenship. This patchwork system, though complex, allowed Rome to draw manpower from a wide area, significantly increasing its military capacity. During this period, the city of Rome itself continued to grow. Its population expanded, public spaces grew busier, and leaders worked to coordinate a society that was becoming more interconnected than before. Urban development remained modest, with structures made from available materials and built to suit immediate needs, rather than grand architectural plans. Streets filled with traders, artisans, and citizens conducting daily business created a lively but sometimes chaotic environment. Administration and logistics became increasingly important as the city worked to manage its expanding role within central Italy. Rome's interactions with the Etruscans also shaped this era. The Etruscan cities were culturally sophisticated and politically established, with traditions and technologies that Rome observed closely. Over time, conflict and cooperation alternated, as Rome both fought and absorbed Etruscan territory. These engagements offered opportunities for Rome to learn new methods of organization and craftsmanship, while simultaneously securing valuable resources and strategic positions. Step by careful step, Rome expanded northward, incorporating lands that strengthened its overall influence. To the south, Greek colonies thrived along the coast in regions collectively known as Magna Graecia. These settlements introduced Rome to new forms of trade, art, and urban development, though relations were not always peaceful. Rome's expansion inevitably brought it into contact, and eventually conflict, with several Greek cities. These encounters would later escalate into larger confrontations, but during this early stage, they introduced Rome to the complexities of dealing with communities that possessed advanced maritime capabilities and long traditions of civic organization. By the late 4th century BCE, Rome had transitioned from a vulnerable settlement recovering from a devastating raid into a structured, ambitious state with disciplined armies and expanding influence. The legions became the backbone of this expansion, built from citizens who marched with increasing confidence and occasionally discussed the best ways to adjust their armor straps to prevent discomfort during long campaigns. Military service bound Rome's population together, reinforcing a shared sense of duty and common purpose. The process of expansion was not without strain. Managing alliances, resolving disputes, and integrating conquered territories required constant attention. Each new agreement brought responsibilities that needed to be balanced carefully, and leaders worked to maintain order in regions that varied widely in customs and expectations. Rome's political system, still relatively young, was tested repeatedly as the demands of governing a larger area increased. Officials learned to navigate unfamiliar challenges, from supply distribution to the coordination of newly acquired allies who occasionally had their own ideas about regional priorities. Still, the Republic proved capable of adapting. Institutions grew more specialized, communication improved, and strategies for maintaining stability developed gradually. Through cooperation, negotiation, and the steady application of military pressure when necessary, Rome extended its reach across the peninsula. At each step, the city absorbed new influences, incorporated new peoples, and adjusted its methods to suit an ever-changing environment. By the time Rome subdued central Italy and established itself as the dominant regional power, the foundation had been laid for even greater expansion. The city, though still modest in appearance compared to the monumental capital it would one day become, had developed a political and military system capable of supporting long-term growth. Its citizen army was efficient, its alliances widespread, and its leadership increasingly experienced in the management of large territories. What had begun as a defensive effort to prevent another catastrophic raid gradually transformed into a consistent pattern of outward movement, guided by practical necessity, strategic opportunity, and the steady rhythm of a society that had learned how to organize itself with remarkable determination. As Rome's sphere of influence expanded, so too did its confidence. The Republic now commanded significant military resources and controlled key regions that provided food, manpower, and strategic access. The stage was set for further encounters with rival powers, both within Italy and beyond, and the developments of this era would create the momentum that carried Rome toward its later confrontations in the south, where wealthy Greek colonies awaited, and eventually across the seas into new theaters of conflict. But for now, Rome stood firmly in central Italy, strengthened by experience and prepared for the opportunities and challenges that would emerge as its ambitions continued to grow. The conflict of the orders and Rome's social transformation. As Rome expanded its reach throughout central Italy, life inside the city continued to evolve in quieter but equally significant ways. The Republic, admirable for its elaborate system of shared power, soon discovered that not everyone felt equally represented within this structure. Roman society had developed two clearly defined groups, the patricians and the plebeians, who coexisted like neighbors sharing a long property line, occasionally cooperating, occasionally disputing boundaries, and frequently adjusting expectations based on the shifting moods of the political landscape. Patricians belonged to the older, wealthier families, whose names were familiar in public affairs, while plebeians made up the wider population engaged in farming, craftsmanship, trade, and the everyday work that kept the city functioning. This arrangement was simple enough in theory, but in practice it produced a gradual tension that would shape Roman politics. for centuries. For much of early Republican history, patricians held the majority of political authority. They filled most of the magistracies, dominated the Senate, and controlled religious and legal traditions, which conveniently reinforced their position. Plebeians, meanwhile, fulfilled their obligations as citizens, served as soldiers in Roman armies, contributed to economic growth, and paid taxes, all while recognizing that their influence in public decision-making remained limited. Over time, this uneven distribution of authority started to wear thin, especially when plebeians found themselves bearing significant responsibilities without enjoying the same protections, opportunities, or recognition as the patrician elite. The strain eventually escalated into what later historians would call the conflict of the orders, a broad, long-running negotiation between the two groups. It was not a single event, but rather a series of developments, adjustments, and political shifts carried out over generations. The conflict did not erupt dramatically, but instead unfolded steadily, marked by peaceful protests, strategic withdrawals from civic duties, and negotiations that required patience from everyone involved. At various moments, plebeians organized themselves and stepped back from public participation, a move that placed considerable pressure on patricians who relied on their service in the army and economy. Rome soon discovered that even the most carefully crafted political system could not function smoothly when half the population decided to pause their contributions for an extended moment. In response, the Republic created a new office, the Tribune of the Plebs, which gave plebeians representatives empowered to intervene in public matters and protect their interests. Tribune authority was unique. Tribunes could veto decisions made by magistrates, propose legislation, and prevent actions they deemed harmful to plebeians. Their presence added a protective voice to the political process and gradually increased plebeian confidence in their place within Roman society. As tribunes became more involved in politics, plebeians gained leverage and opportunities to shape the Republic's future. Despite these improvements, tensions did not disappear overnight. Plebeians continued to challenge their exclusion from major offices, and each new reform required negotiation, persuasion, and adjustments to long-standing practices. Over time, they gained access to the consulship, opening the highest elected office to a broader segment of the population. Eventually, plebeians also secured the right to marry into patrician families, creating social bridges that softened earlier divisions and allowed ambitious plebeians to advance within the political hierarchy more effectively. As these reforms accumulated, the distinction between patrician and plebeian grew less rigid. Wealthy plebeian families emerged, some of which became so influential that future generations might have mistaken them for old patrician lines, if not for the records noting otherwise. Roman society, ever adaptive, incorporated these changes into its evolving structure while maintaining its characteristic attention to procedure and tradition. By the 3rd century BCE, the conflict of the orders had largely resolved itself through sustained compromise. Plebeians had gained a meaningful role in government, access to important offices, and greater legal protections. Patricians retained influence but no longer monopolized authority. The city, for all its complexities, had found a balance that preserved social stability even as it continued to expand outward. Throughout this long process, Roman citizens maintained a sense of collective identity, strengthened by military service and shared civic responsibilities. Plebeians and patricians stood side by side in Rome's expanding legions, facing opponents who did not inquire about their social class before engaging in battle. Military cooperation nurtured practical unity, reinforcing the idea that Rome needed the contributions of all its citizens regardless of background. Soldiers returning from campaigns brought home stories, wealth, and occasionally souvenirs that puzzled their neighbors. But more importantly, they brought a deeper sense of belonging to a community that depended on them. The social reforms also aligned with Rome's broader expansion. As the Republic acquired new territories and incorporated allied communities into its political system, the need for inclusive governance increased. Plebeians who rose into prominent roles demonstrated that the Republic could accommodate talent from diverse backgrounds, allowing Rome to draw on a wider pool of administrators, generals, and public servants. The flexibility of Roman society, which adapted gradually rather than abruptly, helped prevent internal collapse during moments of pressure and contributed to the city's growing strength in the region. Rome's legal landscape evolved as well. The 12 tables, which had once served to clarify basic principles for Roman citizens, gained new significance as plebeian rights expanded. Lawyers, magistrates, and tribunes relied on them for guidance, even when interpreting their contents required creative reasoning. As laws grew more complex, Rome developed a system of legal procedures that fascinated those who enjoyed structure and tested the patience of those who preferred more straightforward resolutions. Still, the legal framework provided consistency, and citizens grew accustomed to the idea of settling disputes through standardized processes rather than personal authority. The outcome of the conflict of the orders significantly shaped the Republic's political culture. Rome emerged with a system that blended elements of aristocratic influence and popular participation, supported by institutions that allowed multiple voices to be heard. Although not perfectly equitable by modern standards, this structure created conditions that enabled Rome to function effectively as its territory expanded and its responsibilities grew. It also fostered political ambition among families of all backgrounds, encouraging new generations to pursue public office with dedication, strategic alliances, and occasional boasts during dinner gatherings. As Rome continued its outward expansion, internal unity proved essential. The Republic faced increasingly complex challenges, new enemies, and shifting alliances, all of which required coordinated leadership. The reforms born from the conflict of the orders helped ensure that Rome possessed a broad and adaptable pool of talented individuals capable of guiding the state through difficult circumstances. Whether managing grain supplies, commanding armies, or negotiating with regional powers, Roman officials operated within a system strengthened by the accommodations made between patricians and plebeians. The story of this internal adjustment is one of steady transformation rather than sudden change. It demonstrates how Rome, even in its early centuries, learned to refine its institutions with careful attention to social needs and practical realities. The Republic did not seek perfection, but maintained enough flexibility to evolve as circumstances demanded. This quality would prove essential in the coming centuries as Rome moved beyond the boundaries of the Italian peninsula, encountering new cultures, new conflicts, and new administrative challenges that would stretch the capabilities of its government to the limits. By the time the conflict of the orders reached its resolution, Rome had become a far more cohesive state than the one that first struggled under the weight of internal disparity. The contributions of plebeians were increasingly acknowledged, and the Republic now stood on a stronger foundation as it prepared for the next phase of its development, one that would bring it into contact with Greek colonies in the south and distant powers across the Mediterranean. The social transformation of Rome, gradual yet profound, set the stage for the Republic's most ambitious pursuits and shaped the character of the society that would one day administer a vast empire. Rome's expansion into southern Italy and the Pyrrhic War. As Rome emerged from its internal adjustments with greater unity between patricians and plebeians, the Republic found itself increasingly involved in the affairs of southern Italy. This region, known for its fertile land, active ports, and well-established Greek colonies, presented both opportunities and challenges. The Greek settlements, collectively referred to as Magna Graecia, had been founded centuries earlier by traders and migrants who favored coastlines with pleasant breezes and convenient harbors. These cities developed sophisticated cultures, commercial networks, and architectural styles that made Rome's simple brickwork appear modest in comparison. Rome, though growing rapidly, remained a relatively conservative society, which meant its encounters with the southern Greek world carried both strategic significance and a mild sense of cultural admiration mixed with rivalry. The immediate problem arose when Tarentum, one of the major Greek cities in the region, observed Roman expansion with a level of concern that prevented them from offering polite invitations to Rome's representatives. When a Roman fleet entered waters Tarentum considered its own, local leaders responded with force, prompting Rome to send envoys to negotiate. The negotiation proceeded poorly, not due to a lack of diplomatic vocabulary, but because Tarentum seemed particularly committed to demonstrating its displeasure. Rome, unsurprisingly, did not take the incident lightly. The situation escalated in a manner that would have benefited from a calm mediator, but instead attracted the attention of various Greek communities who feared Rome's increasing influence. Realizing the challenge ahead, the Greeks of Tarentum sought help from a well-known figure of the Hellenistic world, King Pyrrhus of Epirus. Pyrrhus, who possessed a talent for strategy, a deep ambition, and a personal interest in expanding his influence, welcomed the invitation. He gathered a sizable army equipped with cavalry, infantry, and several war elephants that would later become memorable, not for their numbers but for the general surprise they caused among Roman troops. Pyrrhus crossed the sea to Italy, prepared to demonstrate the effectiveness of a well-coordinated Hellenistic force. When Rome and Pyrrhus finally met on the battlefield, the Romans discovered that elephants, while fascinating creatures at a distance, were considerably less charming when charging across the field. Pyrrhus won the initial engagements, achieving tactical victories that impressed observers but required heavy sacrifices. Roman soldiers, resilient and accustomed to adapting under pressure, regrouped after each defeat, analyzing the challenges and adjusting their formations accordingly. The Romans may not have matched the elegance of Hellenistic maneuvering, but they displayed determination that ensured Pyrrhus's victories came at a greater cost than expected. The term Pyrrhic victory, which later generations would use to describe a win that feels suspiciously like a loss, originated from these battles. Pyrrhus won engagements, yet each success depleted his resources, manpower, and ability to sustain prolonged conflict. Meanwhile, the Romans, despite setbacks, continued to raise new armies and refine their tactics, demonstrating a level of endurance that began to make Pyrrhus reconsider his long-term prospects in Italy. As the war dragged on, Pyrrhus attempted to broaden his efforts by traveling to Sicily, where he hoped to rally support and establish a stronger base of operations. The island, however, presented its own difficulties, and Pyrrhus soon found that managing multiple theaters of war required more patience than even he possessed. Each challenge added weight to his already stretched resources, and with Rome growing more resolute, he eventually decided to withdraw from Italy altogether. His departure marked a turning point that left the Greek colonies without their strongest military ally. With Pyrrhus gone, Rome resumed its advancement with renewed confidence. The conflicts in the region gradually concluded, and city after city entered Rome's sphere of influence through treaties or military submission. Tarentum eventually came under Roman control, solidifying a foundation for future expansion. The acquisition of the south offered Rome access to important ports, rich agricultural zones, and increased contact with the broader Mediterranean world. It also opened pathways to new forms of trade and introduced cultural elements that would subtly influence Roman society, from artistic styles to city planning ideas that promised to add elegance to Rome's growing urban spaces. Rome's successful integration of southern Italy also strengthened its military and economic capabilities. The region contributed new manpower, resources, and logistical advantages that allowed Rome to support larger armies and more ambitious campaigns. The Republic now commanded a network of roads, alliances, and fortified positions that extended across nearly the entire peninsula, providing the infrastructure necessary for future operations beyond Italy. Soldiers trained in the rugged hills of Samnium and the diverse terrains of the south gained valuable experience that would prove essential in Rome's next conflicts. The conclusion of Rome's conflict with the Greek colonies did more than expand territory. It introduced Rome to the complexities of dealing with states that possessed advanced civic structures, maritime capabilities, and long traditions of political autonomy. Integrating these communities required careful administration, diplomatic agreements, and occasionally firm reminders that treaties worked best when both sides honored them consistently. Rome, increasingly accustomed to managing diverse populations, improved its governance strategies and strengthened its capacity to oversee regions with unique identities and local customs. Rome's advances in southern Italy also brought it into closer proximity with the island of Sicily, where Carthage maintained strong commercial and military interests. The presence of two ambitious powers in such close quarters set the stage for a confrontation that would shape the Mediterranean for centuries. At this stage, however, Rome's leaders focused primarily on consolidating control within Italy, stabilizing alliances, and ensuring the regions recently brought under their influence adapted smoothly to Roman expectations. Daily life in Rome continued to expand in rhythm with the Republic's political and military success. Markets bustled with goods from new territories, and citizens discussed recent victories while adjusting their routines to accommodate the growing scale of public administration. The expansion southward enhanced Rome's sense of identity, reinforcing the idea that the Republic was destined for greater responsibilities, even though no official committee had been formed to outline what those responsibilities might look like. Confidence grew not from boasts, but from cumulative experience, each campaign adding to the belief that Rome's system of citizen armies and structured governance could withstand significant challenges. The war with Pyrrhus also left Rome with an enhanced understanding of Hellenistic warfare. Roman commanders observed the strengths and weaknesses of phalanx formations, cavalry maneuvers, and battlefield coordination. Over time, the Republic integrated what it found useful into its own military structures, not by copying foreign methods outright, but by adapting them to suit Roman organization and discipline. This ability to observe, absorb, and refine would play a defining role in Rome's rise as a major Mediterranean force. With southern Italy firmly under its influence, Rome now possessed a unified peninsula behind it, providing security at home and freedom to focus outward. This did not mean Rome's future would be simple. The next stage of its development would involve the Roman Republic stepping into conflicts that extended far beyond the peninsula. Across the water lay powerful states with armies, navies, and ambitions of their own, including Carthage, whose maritime expertise had shaped trade routes for centuries. Rome's expansion southward placed it one step closer to these wider engagements, and soon the Republic would find itself participating in wars that introduced entirely new scales of strategy and consequence. For the moment, however, Rome stood securely at the center of a unified Italy, strengthened by experience and prepared for whatever developments would appear along the horizon. The campaigns in the south had tested Rome's resilience, revealed its capacity for adaptation, and affirmed that its political system could withstand external pressures while managing internal growth. As the Republic looked across the seas towards Sicily and beyond, it carried with it the lessons of Pyrrhus, the endurance of its armies, and the steady confidence of a state that had learned to turn challenges into momentum. The Punic Wars and Rome's emergence as a Mediterranean power. The consolidation of southern Italy placed Rome comfortably at the center of the peninsula, but comfort rarely lasted long in the ancient world. Just across the narrow waters of the Strait of Messina lay Sicily, a remarkably fertile island, admired by merchants, farmers, and anyone who appreciated landscapes that produced more grain than discussions about who owned what. Sicily also served as an important crossroads in the Mediterranean, and much of its western territory was influenced or controlled by Carthage, a wealthy North African city with a talent for seafaring, trade, and occasionally alarming its rivals by appearing in places sooner than expected, thanks to an efficient navy. Rome's growing presence in southern Italy inevitably led to increased interactions with Carthage, interactions that began politely enough but slowly drifted toward conflict as both sides attempted to secure their interests. The first significant spark occurred when disputes in the Sicilian city of Messana drew Rome's attention. The city, caught between asking for help and regretting asking for help, eventually involved both Rome and Carthage in its affairs, creating a situation that resembled a gathering in which too many assertive guests arrived at once. Rome recognized that allowing Carthage to increase its presence in Sicily might limit Roman influence in the region, while Carthage viewed Roman involvement as an unwelcome surprise. This mutual unease encouraged both sides to position themselves advantageously, though the resulting escalation proved far more extensive than anyone likely anticipated over a casual diplomatic meeting. The First Punic War began, marking the start of a prolonged and intricate struggle. One immediate challenge for Rome was its lack of naval experience. Land battles were familiar, manageable, and suitably organized for Roman methods. But ocean waves introduced an entirely new category of movement that required ships, skilled crews, and an appreciation for the unpredictable nature of winds. Carthage, with centuries of maritime activity behind it, possessed elegant fleets, practiced sailors, and an impressive comfort level with all things aquatic. Rome, determined to compensate for its inexperience, began constructing ships, modeled after Carthaginian designs, supplemented by an inventive device known as the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed Roman soldiers to turn naval battles into something reassuringly similar to land engagements. This adaptation gave Rome a surprising advantage. Instead of trying to outmaneuver expert Carthaginian sailors, Roman crews focused on approaching enemy ships long enough for soldiers to cross over and convert the encounter into a controlled melee. The tactic proved effective, though not without comedic mishaps during early training sessions when new crews discovered that rowing in unison required more rhythm than most of them possessed. Still, the system improved, and Rome gradually developed a respectable fleet. The war stretched on for over 2 decades, marked by shifting strategies, storms that destroyed entire fleets, and lengthy periods in which both sides rebuilt resources. Rome's persistence eventually paid off when it won key engagements and forced Carthage to negotiate peace. The treaty granted Rome control over Sicily, making it the Republic's first province outside the Italian peninsula. This new acquisition signaled Rome's future trajectory as a power increasingly involved in overseas administration and maritime logistics. Carthage, although defeated, remained a wealthy and capable city, with ambitions that did not disappear simply because a treaty required temporary adjustments. In the years following the First Punic War, Carthage turned its attention westward to Hispania, where rich mineral deposits promised economic recovery and the foundation for renewed strength. Under the leadership of Hamilcar Barca, and later his son Hannibal, Carthage built a formidable presence across the region. Hannibal, known for his skill in command and ability to inspire troops, eventually became the leading figure in Carthaginian strategy. His experiences in Hispania prepared him for larger confrontations, and as tensions between Rome and Carthage resurfaced, the stage was set for a conflict that would test both sides in ways the First War had not. The Second Punic War began when Hannibal advanced on the city of Saguntum, an ally of Rome. Rome demanded his withdrawal, and when Carthage refused, the Republic declared war. Hannibal responded with a plan notable for its boldness. Instead of sailing toward Italy, he marched from Hispania through Gaul and across the Alps, guiding an army that included cavalry, infantry, and a memorable but modest number of war elephants. The passage through the mountains posed enormous challenges. Cold winds, steep paths, and less than cooperative terrain reduced the number of animals significantly, though the survivors continued on, leaving future storytellers ample material for dramatic retellings. When Hannibal descended into Italy, Rome faced one of the most formidable commanders it would ever encounter. Hannibal won a series of decisive battles, most notably at Cannae, where he encircled and defeated a massive Roman force. The battle demonstrated his tactical mastery and dealt Rome a severe blow. Yet, despite these impressive victories, Hannibal found it difficult to secure the broader support he needed from Italian allies, many of whom hesitated to shift loyalties even in the face of Carthaginian success. Rome, refusing to concede, adopted strategies designed to avoid large direct engagements, while steadily weakening Hannibal's position. Meanwhile, Rome launched campaigns in Hispania and eventually North Africa under the command of Publius Cornelius Scipio, whose ability to adapt tactics and maintain troop morale proved critical. Scipio's successes culminated in his invasion of the Carthaginian homeland, forcing Hannibal to return from Italy to defend Carthage. Their armies met at the Battle of Zama, where Scipio emerged victorious. The war concluded with Carthage relinquishing its overseas holdings and accepting strict limitations on its future military activity. Rome, now dominant across much of the Western Mediterranean, expanded its influence further and gained control over vast territories in Hispania. Despite this defeat, Carthage remained a functioning city and commercial center. Its recovery, though slower and more cautious than before, continued steadily. Some Roman leaders viewed this resilience with suspicion and argued that Carthage's mere existence posed a risk to Rome's security. Such opinions gained traction over time, especially as Roman politics grew increasingly shaped by individuals who preferred preventive measures to long negotiations. Eventually, tension escalated again in what became known as the Third Punic War. Unlike the extensive maneuvering of the previous conflicts, this war concentrated almost entirely on the siege of Carthage. Rome committed overwhelming force to the campaign, surrounding the city and cutting off its supplies. The siege lasted several years, during which Carthage resisted determinedly, despite facing increasingly limited options. In the end, Rome captured the city, dismantled its remnants, and incorporated the surrounding region into its growing provincial system. This conclusion removed Carthage as a political rival and secured Rome's position as the unmatched power of the Western Mediterranean. The Punic Wars transformed Rome from a regional Italian power into a state with an expansive network of provinces, administrative responsibilities, and military commitments across the sea. The Republic now needed fleets, tax systems, governorships, and logistics capable of supporting operations far from Rome's original borders. Citizens who once concerned themselves primarily with local fields and nearby trade routes now found themselves part of a polity engaged in international affairs, commanding resources and territories that required new strategies and adapted forms of governance. Rome's identity shifted gradually as a result. The Republic developed a stronger naval presence, expanded its diplomatic channels, and trained commanders who understood the complexities of long-distance campaigns. Soldiers who once marched through familiar Italian hills now saw mountains, coasts, and plains far removed from home, returning with stories that blended military detail with observations about unfamiliar landscapes and occasionally puzzling food. By the end of the Punic Wars, Rome stood as a dominant Mediterranean force with new challenges ahead. Its expansion into Hispania, its increasing involvement with Greek states, and its responsibilities across newly acquired territories set the stage for another era of growth, political strain, and transformation. The Republic, strengthened by its victories, yet stretched by its obligations, prepared to navigate a world that had become significantly larger than the one it knew when its conflicts were confined to the Italian peninsula. Rome's absorption of Greek culture and its social transformations. As Rome's victories across the Mediterranean expanded its territory, the Republic found itself in frequent contact with regions known for artistic refinement, philosophical exploration, and architectural elegance. Chief among these influences was the world of the Greeks, whose cities had once dominated the cultural landscape of the eastern Mediterranean. Rome, although increasingly powerful, remained at heart a practical and somewhat austere society, known more for efficient roads, sturdy sandals, and disciplined legions than for artistic flamboyance. Yet as Roman soldiers marched through Greek lands and Roman administrators negotiated with Greek cities, an exchange began to occur, subtle at first but soon unmistakable, drawing Rome into a cultural transformation that carried lasting effects. The process began with Rome's involvement in the affairs of Greek states during and after the Punic Wars, as Rome assisted allies, confronted rivals, and eventually took administrative control over regions such as Macedonia and parts of the Aegean. It encountered societies whose intellectual traditions stretched back centuries. Greek cities showcased theaters carved into hillsides, public squares, where philosophers enjoyed prolonged discussions about the meaning of everything, and sculptures that attempted to capture the ideal human form. Romans took notice, not always with immediate enthusiasm, but with enough curiosity to begin adopting elements of what they observed. This contact intensified as Roman generals returned home from campaigns carrying not only spoils of war but also books, artworks, and skilled individuals. Greek tutors began appearing in Roman households, teaching language, rhetoric, and other subjects that broadened the education of young elites. Romans discovered that Greek literature offered stories filled with complex heroes, elaborate descriptions, and speeches longer than the average Roman attention span, yet captivating enough for those willing to read beyond the opening lines. The influx of Greek culture introduced Rome to ideas about drama, philosophy, history writing, and artistic theory, presenting new ways of thinking that gradually shaped Roman intellectual life. Public spaces in Rome began to reflect these influences as well. City planners and wealthy patrons supported the construction of buildings inspired by Greek models, including theaters that allowed audiences to enjoy performances featuring masked actors, carefully rehearsed dialogues, and dramatic pauses, long enough for spectators to contemplate whether they should have brought more bread. Artisans experimented with Greek styles, creating sculptures that blended Roman subjects with techniques learned from Greek masters. Even coins and public monuments displayed designs influenced by the Greek aesthetic, subtly shifting Rome's visual identity. Roman literature also evolved significantly due to Greek influence. Early attempts at poetry and comedy borrowed heavily from Greek forms, adapted to suit Roman audiences who enjoyed humor, but preferred jokes grounded in everyday life rather than lofty mythological confusion. Writers like Plautus and Terence reworked Greek comedies into versions with lively Roman characters and punchlines that reflected local customs. Over time, Rome developed its own literary tradition, though Greek models remained central to its formation. The adoption of Greek culture did not occur without occasional friction. Some Romans, particularly those devoted to traditional customs, expressed concern that foreign influences might weaken the simplicity and discipline that had long characterized Roman society. These individuals preferred sturdy farms, straightforward meals, and short speeches delivered with minimal gesturing. Nevertheless, the tide of Greek influence proved steady and persistent, gradually weaving itself into Rome's identity, without diminishing the Republic's foundational values. Most Romans embraced the idea that cultural enrichment could coexist with military discipline and political structure, as long as philosophical debates did not interfere with agricultural responsibilities. Alongside these cultural changes, Rome experienced significant social transformations during this era. One major shift involved the increasing concentration of wealth among elite families. Rome's expanding empire generated resources through taxation, trade, and the acquisition of foreign goods, and much of this wealth accumulated in the hands of those with the connections and financial networks to manage large estates. These estates, often worked by slaves captured in war, produced agricultural surpluses and further strengthened the economic power of elite landowners. As wealthy families expanded their holdings, smaller farmers found it increasingly difficult to compete, leading some to sell their land and move to the city in search of opportunities. This migration contributed to the growing urban population. Rome, already bustling, became even more crowded as new residents moved into insulae, tall apartment buildings that varied widely in quality depending on their architectural soundness and the willingness of landlords to maintain them. Life in the city carried a lively rhythm, with markets full of goods from across the Mediterranean, public announcements echoing through the squares, and street vendors who could describe their merchandise with impressive enthusiasm. Yet the influx of people also strained resources, increased economic disparity, and created social challenges that required ongoing attention from magistrates and administrators. The presence of large numbers of slaves further affected Rome's social dynamics. These individuals came from diverse backgrounds, often brought to Italy as a result of military victories. Slaves supported households, farms, workshops, and public projects, contributing significantly to Rome's daily functioning. Their labor expanded the economic output of elite estates, but also altered the social structure by reducing the need for hired workers. This shift placed additional pressure on free citizens seeking employment, contributing to the complexity of urban life. Amid these changes, the Senate and magistrates worked to maintain stability through administration, legislation, and occasional adjustments to property regulations. While debates could become lengthy, Rome prided itself on procedural order, and officials dedicated themselves to guiding the Republic with steady hands. Some leaders proposed reforms to address inequality, though success varied depending on political alliances, economic interests, and the willingness of citizens to adopt new policies. As Greek culture took root in Roman education and daily life, Roman elites embraced broader intellectual pursuits. Young statesmen learned rhetoric inspired by Greek models, enabling them to deliver speeches with refined structure and persuasive phrasing. Philosophical schools found followers among Romans who appreciated discussions about ethics, logic, and the nature of the cosmos, so long as such discussions concluded in time for scheduled Senate meetings. Scholars and writers began producing works that blended Roman historical sensibilities with Greek literary techniques, creating a distinct cultural synthesis that would later influence much of Europe. This era also saw the gradual development of a Roman historical consciousness. Greek historians had long written about the rise and fall of states, and Romans used their methods to record the expansion of the Republic. These works helped citizens understand their growing role in the Mediterranean and provided a sense of continuity as the Republic navigated new responsibilities. Though sometimes embellished, these histories captured Rome's achievements, challenges, and ambitions, offering a narrative that complemented its evolving identity. Despite the considerable influence of Greek culture, Rome preserved its core values: discipline, duty, practicality, and an appreciation for policies that could be implemented without unnecessary disruption. The blending of Greek and Roman elements enriched public life without replacing foundational structures. In fact, the combination created a unique character that distinguished Rome from both its predecessors and its contemporaries. By embracing Greek culture while maintaining Roman traditions, the Republic positioned itself as a hybrid power capable of military dominance and cultural sophistication. This dual identity supported Rome's expanding administration, strengthened its diplomacy, and allowed it to communicate with diverse regions as it extended its influence. The combination of Roman governance and Greek intellectual heritage would later contribute to the durability of Roman institutions, even as the empire evolved through different forms. By the end of this period, Rome stood as a society transformed not by sudden upheaval, but by continuous contact with the world beyond its borders. Its intellectual landscape widened, its population shifted, and its sense of identity expanded. The Republic was becoming not only a political power, but also a cultural force woven into the broader fabric of the Mediterranean. The influences it absorbed prepared it for the challenges ahead, as future conflicts and internal pressures would test the strength of the system it had so carefully developed. The late Republican crisis, the Gracchi, the social war, and the rise of generals. As Rome expanded its territories and absorbed the influences of the Mediterranean world, its internal structure began experiencing pressures that were not as easily managed as border disputes or diplomatic negotiations. Wealth from conquests flowed into the Republic, but it rarely spread evenly. Large estates known as latifundia grew across the countryside, managed by wealthy landowners and worked by increasing numbers of slaves. Meanwhile, many small farmers found it difficult to maintain their lands, especially when military service required long absences that left their fields unattended. Some returned home to discover that crops had taken their own creative approach to survival, often with results that were not profitable, prompting many farmers to move into the city in search of more reliable opportunities. Rome's urban population grew quickly, filling neighborhoods with people seeking employment, support, and a sense of stability in a city that was becoming more crowded by the year. While Rome provided entertainment, public services, and the occasional distribution of grain, these offerings could not fully compensate for the uneven shift in wealth and opportunity. Conversations in markets and along busy streets increasingly reflected concerns about economic imbalance, though such discussions were usually delivered in the calm, matter-of-fact tone typical of Romans who preferred practicality to dramatics. Amid these conditions, two brothers emerged as prominent figures, Tiberius Gracchus and his younger brother Gaius. Both came from a distinguished family with experience in Roman politics and military service. As tribunes of the plebs at different times, they turned their attention to the challenges facing Rome's ordinary citizens. Tiberius proposed a land reform aimed at redistributing public land that had been increasingly consolidated by wealthy elites. His plan intended to help small farmers regain access to property and promote stability within the Republic. The proposal stirred considerable debate. While many supported the effort to strengthen the small landholding class, Others resisted changes that threatened long-established economic arrangements. Tiberius pressed forward with determination, using his authority as tribune to pursue the legislation. Although parts of his plan were implemented, the process generated significant political tension. His career ended abruptly during a public disturbance that escalated far beyond what anyone wandering through the forum might have expected from a legislative disagreement. Several years later, Gaius Gracchus continued his brother's work, addressing not only land issues but also grain distribution, judicial reform, and infrastructure projects. His approach was more comprehensive, but he encountered resistance similar to what Tiberius faced. Gaius sought to balance the needs of Rome's population with the expectations of its governing institutions, yet even carefully structured reforms became sources of contention in a strained political climate. Ultimately, his efforts met a tragic end, echoing the fate of his brother and leaving Rome without the coherent reform program it needed to address its growing social challenges. The deaths of the Gracchi brothers marked a turning point. Their attempts at reform highlighted deep divisions within the Republic, divisions that continued to widen in the years that followed. As Rome expanded its territories further, managing distant regions required more military oversight, which in turn elevated the importance of generals who commanded legions. These armies, composed increasingly of citizens seeking pay, stability, and the promise of land after service, grew loyal not only to the Republic, but also to the commanders who trained them, led them, and ensured their well-being. One of the most influential figures of this era was Gaius Marius, a general known for his practical mind and preference for efficient organization. Marius introduced reforms that opened military service to citizens who previously lacked sufficient property to qualify for enlistment. This adjustment provided Rome with larger, more flexible armies and offered lower-income citizens new opportunities. Soldiers under Marius developed strong loyalty to their commander, appreciating both his leadership and his ability to secure rewards for their service. These changes strengthened Rome's military capacity, but also altered the balance of power within the Republic. Generals with devoted armies became increasingly prominent in politics. Their influence grew as the Republic faced threats from external forces, such as migrating tribes from the north and internal instability that demanded strong leadership. At the same time, tensions within Rome intensified. Administrative demands continued to rise as new territories required governance, taxation, and communication systems. Senators debated policy, magistrates implemented laws, and citizens attended assemblies to vote on measures that affected the daily life of a population now spread over vast distances. Yet beneath this activity lay a growing sense that the Republic's political machinery was straining under its own weight, particularly as ambitious individuals recognized opportunities to use military power to advance their positions. As Marius gained influence, another figure emerged whose approach to politics and military command would profoundly shape Rome's future. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, initially a subordinate officer, rose steadily through the ranks. Although different in personality and background, Sulla shared Marius's understanding of the importance of military strength. Over time, the two developed a rivalry that escalated beyond the confines of ordinary political competition. The tension between Marius and Sulla became especially pronounced when decisions about military command intersected with political ambition. The Senate assigned Sulla to lead a campaign against a powerful foreign king, but Marius maneuvered to have the appointment reversed. This reversal triggered a sequence of events that would have benefited from lengthy mediation, but instead resulted in Sulla marching his army toward Rome, an action that set a precedent both unusual and unsettling. Sulla's entry into Rome marked the first time a Roman commander used his legions to enforce political authority within the city. After temporarily securing control, Sulla departed to conduct his campaign, leaving behind a republic shaken by the realization that armies could now determine political outcomes. When Sulla returned victorious, he again asserted military control, restructuring Roman institutions to strengthen the Senate and limit the powers of tribunes, whom he believed had gained too much influence through earlier reforms. Eventually, Sulla stepped down from his position and retired from public life, a move that surprised many given the authority he held. His departure did not restore balance, however. Instead, it highlighted the instability of a system in which generals, with loyal armies, could shape the republic's political direction. The concerns raised by his actions would echo through the following decades, influencing how future leaders understood their own roles in the evolving structure of Roman governance. Meanwhile, Rome faced additional pressures from within Italy. Many allied communities, having supported Rome in war for generations, sought recognition through the extension of citizenship. Their requests were not immediately granted, leading to frustration that culminated in the Social War, a conflict between Rome and its Italian allies. The war involved coordinated actions across multiple regions as allied cities formed their own political structures and fielded armies that challenged Roman authority. Rome responded with significant military effort, gradually regaining control of the peninsula. As the conflict progressed, it became increasingly clear that political concessions would be necessary to restore stability. Eventually, Rome granted citizenship to many of its Italian allies, integrating them further into the Republic. This expansion of citizenship fundamentally reshaped Rome's political landscape, incorporating diverse communities into a unified framework that extended participation and responsibilities across a wider population. By the end of these events, the Republic had changed significantly. The Gracchi had revealed deep social divisions. Marius had transformed the army. Sulla had demonstrated the potential for military intervention in politics. And the Social War had broadened the meaning of Roman citizenship. Rome emerged from this period stronger in some ways, fractured in others, and increasingly reliant on the abilities and ambitions of powerful generals whose influence would soon grow even more prominent. The Republic was no longer the compact civic community of earlier centuries. It now spanned vast lands, supported complex institutions, and depended on administrative flexibility. Yet the same dynamics that enabled its expansion also contributed to instability. As new leaders rose and old structures strained to keep pace with changing realities, Rome moved steadily toward another era of transformation, one in which internal conflicts would shape the course of the Republic as profoundly as external threats once had. Pompey, Crassus, Julius Caesar, and the First Triumvirate. By the early 1st century BCE, Rome had become a place where political ambition and military success moved together like synchronized dancers who occasionally stepped on each other's toes. The Republic had grown vast, its territories stretching across seas and mountains, and governing such an expanse required steady leadership, calm debates, and an optimistic hope that senators would resist the temptation to interrupt one another. Yet the conditions of the age encouraged individuals with strong personalities and even stronger legions to rise to prominence, creating an environment in which the structure of the state bent ever so slightly toward those able to command both armies and admiration. Among the figures who shaped this period, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known as Pompey the Great, stood out early for his combination of youth, confidence, and a resume built surprisingly quickly. Raised in a family with military traditions, Pompey developed a reputation for effective leadership, earning successes in campaigns that granted him extraordinary authority at a relatively young age. His victories in Sicily, Africa, and later Hispania established him as one of Rome's most capable commanders. Soldiers respected him, allies appreciated his reliability, and even political rivals could not deny that he possessed a notable sense of timing when entering a battlefield. Pompey's career gained further momentum during his command against a widespread piracy problem in the Mediterranean. Pirates had become a disruptive force, interrupting trade routes, capturing ships, and causing merchants to question whether shipping schedules might need more flexibility. The Senate entrusted Pompey with extensive powers to solve the issue, and he approached the task with characteristic efficiency. His strategy divided the sea into sections, assigned forces to each, and cleared maritime routes so effectively that trade soon resumed with far fewer complications. Pompey's reputation reached new heights, establishing him as a stabilizing figure in Roman affairs and giving him admirers across multiple regions. At the same time, Marcus Licinius Crassus emerged as a figure whose influence did not stem primarily from battlefield accomplishments, but from wealth accumulated through business ventures, real estate development, and a habit of purchasing burning buildings at discounted prices before helping extinguish the flames. Crassus possessed financial resources that could support political careers, fund public works, or provide timely assistance to ambitious allies. He also held military experience, most notably in helping suppress the uprising led by Spartacus, an event that strengthened his standing among those who valued order and firmness in response to civil unrest. Operating alongside these two figures was Gaius Julius Caesar, whose career blended political skill, social charm, and a growing reputation for strategic ability. Caesar's early years included service in various magistracies, command roles in military operations, and a gift for building alliances through hospitality, negotiation, and a willingness to spend significant sums on public entertainment. Citizens admired his generosity, colleagues noted his persuasive abilities, and observers frequently commented on his confidence, which remained remarkably steady even in unpredictable circumstances. Although each man held considerable influence, their ambitions occasionally collided with resistance from the Senate or from one another. Rome's political environment had become increasingly competitive, with decision-making influenced by shifting alliances, public expectations, and occasional uncertainties about whether proposed policies were designed for administrative efficiency or personal advantage. It was within this landscape that Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar formed an alliance that would later be known as the First Triumvirate. The alliance emerged in 60 BCE after each man encountered obstacles that limited his ability to achieve specific political goals. Pompey sought land distributions for his veterans and the ratification of administrative arrangements he had established in the East. Crassus desired financial policies favorable to tax collectors, aligned with his interests. Caesar aimed to secure a consulship and a subsequent provincial command that offered opportunities for military distinction. While none of these objectives were impossible to achieve individually, political opposition made progress difficult. By combining their influence, however, each could support the others and create a political force stronger than its individual components. Their agreement functioned as a cooperative understanding rather than a formal institution. Pompey contributed military prestige, Crassus provided financial strength, and Caesar offered political agility along with the ability to connect with different segments of Roman society. Together they influenced elections, legislation, and appointments, guiding the Republic's direction in ways that reflected their shared and individual goals. Observers of the time recognized the group's effectiveness, noting that the alliance shifted the balance of power in Rome more decisively than any single individual could have managed alone. Caesar's election as consul in 59 BCE marked a key moment for the Triumvirate. During his term, he advanced legislation that supported Pompey's settlement plans, assisted Crassus's financial allies, and strengthened his own position. His methods, sometimes assertive, drew criticism from political opponents, but he achieved results that reinforced the alliance and prepared him for his next objective, a provincial command. When his consulship ended, he secured leadership over regions in Gaul, a position that would eventually transform him into one of the most celebrated military figures in Roman history. While Caesar traveled north to begin his campaigns, Pompey and Crassus remained in Rome, each managing their spheres of influence. Caesar's reports from Gaul described victories over tribes, strategic maneuvers, and expanding Roman control across a wide territory. His successes brought him fame, loyalty from legions who served under him, and a growing sense among some senators that Caesar's rise might someday pose challenges to established authority. Nonetheless, the alliance held firm for several years, with Pompey and Crassus working to maintain stability at home. In 56 BCE, the three met at Lucca to reaffirm their cooperation, agreeing to pursue further terms in office and extend Caesar's command in Gaul. This meeting strengthened their partnership temporarily, but underlying tensions remained. Pompey and Crassus, both influential but operating in shared political space, experienced increasing rivalry. Caesar's achievements, though favorable to the alliance, added additional complexity by expanding his personal authority. The balance of the triumvirate shifted when Crassus sought military glory comparable to that of Pompey and Caesar. He undertook a campaign against the Parthian Empire, motivated by hopes of expanding Roman influence and securing personal prestige. The expedition, however, encountered significant difficulties. At Carthage in 53 BCE, Crassus suffered a disastrous defeat, losing both his army and his life. The loss removed the financial and political bridge he had provided, weakening the alliance profoundly. With Crassus gone, the partnership between Pompey and Caesar faced increasing strain. Pompey remained a respected leader with strong connections in Rome, while Caesar's continued victories in Gaul elevated him to a position unmatched by most contemporaries. Their interests, once aligned, now drifted apart as political circumstances evolved. The Senate, concerned about Caesar's rising influence, began leaning more toward Pompey as a stabilizing figure capable of counterbalancing Caesar's growing power. As Caesar's command neared its end, discussions arose about whether he should return to Rome as a private citizen or retain immunity by seeking further office. Caesar preferred the latter, aware that political opponents might otherwise attempt legal action against him. Pompey supported the Senate's position that Caesar should disband his army before entering the city, setting the stage for a conflict that neither alliance nor negotiation could fully resolve. Thus, the first triumvirate, once formed to advance shared objectives, gradually unraveled as shifting alliances, ambition, and unexpected events altered the balance among its members. What began as a practical arrangement had become the foundation for a period of intense political tension, one that would shape the final decades of the Republic. Caesar and Pompey, once partners, now faced one another as rivals poised to influence the fate of Rome in directions that few could predict with certainty, though many sensed that the Republic was approaching another significant turning point. Caesar and Pompey, dictatorship, and the end of the Roman Republic. As the alliance between Caesar and Pompey dissolved, Rome settled into a delicate silence, the kind that arrives just before two exceptionally determined individuals decide that compromise is no longer their preferred method of communication. Caesar remained in Gaul, commanding loyal legions who admired him for victories achieved through careful planning and an impressive tolerance for marching long distances in unpredictable weather. Pompey, meanwhile, stayed in Rome, gradually becoming the Senate's favored figure for maintaining stability. Together they formed a balanced arrangement, at least in theory, though this balance rested on the increasingly thin hope that neither would feel forced to challenge the other. The question of Caesar's return to Rome became the hinge upon which the Republic's fate slowly turned. His term as provincial commander was ending, and the Senate insisted that he must relinquish his army before entering the city. Caesar, aware that his political opponents might find creative ways to complicate his future, preferred to keep the legal protection offered by office. Pompey supported the Senate's decision, placing him publicly at odds with his former ally. With negotiations failing, Caesar made a choice that would echo through Roman history. In early 49 BCE, he led his army across the Rubicon, a modest river that became unexpectedly famous due to Caesar's decision to cross it with troops. The move signaled the start of a civil war, though the moment itself was surprisingly quiet, featuring no dramatic speeches beyond what Caesar may have said to himself for encouragement. Once across the river, his forces moved quickly, prompting Pompey and many senators to leave Rome and regroup in the eastern provinces where they could gather larger armies. Caesar advanced through Italy with minimal resistance, taking control of key cities while ensuring the local population remained calm and well-informed. His next objective lay in Hispania, where Pompey's allies commanded significant forces. Caesar moved swiftly, defeating them through careful maneuvering. With the western front secured, he turned his attention eastward, crossing the Adriatic Sea in pursuit of Pompey. The process involved weather challenges, supply concerns, and a great deal of navigation, but Caesar remained steady, guiding his forces patiently until they reached Greece. The decisive encounter came at Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Pompey's army outnumbered Caesar's, but Caesar's troops held the advantage of long service under a consistent commander. During the battle, Caesar's forces executed their strategies with practiced coordination, eventually breaking through Pompey's lines. Pompey retreated and eventually traveled to Egypt, hoping to find refuge, but his attempt ended abruptly when local authorities made an unfortunate decision upon his arrival. Caesar, arriving soon after, continued his efforts to stabilize the region, though this required involvement in local political disputes that added several months to his schedule. After Egypt, Caesar moved through other territories where remaining opposition lingered. In North Africa, he defeated forces led by senators allied with Pompey, and in Hispania, he overcame the final resistance from Pompey's sons. Each campaign extended his influence and demonstrated the ability of his legions to adapt to varied terrain and circumstances. By 45 BCE, Caesar had effectively won the civil war, ending the major military opposition to his authority. Upon returning to Rome, he began implementing reforms designed to address administrative needs that had accumulated during years of conflict. He revised the calendar, reorganized provincial administration, adjusted debt regulations, expanded citizenship rights in certain regions, and initiated building projects aimed at improving the city's infrastructure. These measures brought order to areas that had grown disorganized, and citizens appreciated that the city now operated on a calendar less likely to drift into seasonal confusion. As his influence grew, the Senate granted Caesar increasingly extensive powers, culminating in the title of Dictator for life. Although the role included responsibilities for guiding reforms and maintaining stability, the duration of the appointment created unease among senators who preferred leadership that rotated predictably. Caesar continued his work with characteristic confidence, preparing new projects and administrative plans intended to strengthen the republic's structure. Yet the level of authority he now held proved difficult for some members of the Senate to accept. Amid this atmosphere, a group of senators formed a plan to remove Caesar from power. Their meetings were discreet, conducted with the quiet urgency of individuals organizing something they hoped would restore the republic's traditional balance. On the Ides of March, in 44 CE, Caesar attended a Senate meeting, unaware that several attendees had brought more than documents and notes. The event proceeded swiftly, with Caesar unable to defend himself against coordinated action from multiple participants. He died in the chamber, leaving Rome without a clear successor and without resolution to the underlying tensions that had motivated the conspirators. The aftermath unfolded differently from what the planners expected. Rather than restoring the old republican order, Caesar's death created a vacuum into which new rivalries quickly emerged. His close ally Mark Antony took steps to assert leadership, presenting himself as a guardian of Caesar's legacy. At the same time, Caesar's grandnephew Octavian, who had been named in Caesar's will, arrived in Rome to claim his position within the unfolding political landscape. Senators attempted to stabilize the situation, but the alliances shifting around Antony and Octavian made consistent governance difficult. Over the following months, political maneuvering grew more complex. Antony and Octavian alternated between cooperation and tension until they eventually joined forces with Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate, a new power structure designed to bring order and pursue those who had participated in Caesar's death. The triumvirs secured control over Rome and its territories, but their partnership contained built-in rivalries that gradually surfaced as each man strengthened his position. Eventually, only Antony and Octavian remained as the principal contenders for leadership. Antony, operating largely in the east and forming a political and personal alliance with Cleopatra of Egypt, pursued strategies he believed would secure his authority. Octavian, guiding affairs in Rome, emphasized stability and unity, presenting himself as the natural heir to Caesar's political vision. As tensions increased, the two prepared for conflict. Their forces met in 31 BCE at the naval battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet prevailed, prompting Antony and Cleopatra to retreat to Egypt, where their campaign ultimately ended. With their defeat, Octavian achieved sole leadership of the Roman world, bringing the long era of civil wars to a close. By 27 CE, Octavian reorganized the Republic's political system into a new framework that preserved Republican titles while granting him overarching authority. He adopted the name Augustus and became the first Roman emperor, marking the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Empire. The structures and traditions of the Republic remained visible, but real power now lay with a single ruler whose position ensured long-term stability after decades of internal conflict. Thus, the final chapters of the Roman Republic closed quietly, shaped by ambition, reform, rivalry, and the steady expansion of military and political power. Caesar's rise and fall, Pompey's opposition, and Octavian's eventual triumph formed a continuous sequence that transformed Rome into a state prepared for a new era, one that would extend its influence farther than its founders ever imagined.